The Young and the Restless spoilers Tuesday full episodes July 8, 2025. The air in Genoa City was thick with expectation, the kind of tension that could only come from long-held secrets, new alliances, and shifting loyalties. Behind the walls of the mansions and boardrooms, the battle for power was more than just business, it was personal. And for some, the lines between love, manipulation, and strategy had long since blurred. As the days passed, the game became clearer. No one would be left untouched, and the stakes were higher than ever. Audra Charles was no stranger to the art of seduction, not just in the bedroom, but in the boardroom as well. Her latest target, Kyle Abbott, had been a challenge she hadn't anticipated. Despite his polished image and careful control, there was something about him, something she couldn't quite place, that kept her intrigued. Maybe it was his ambition, or the way he had always been so strategically positioned within his family's empire, but what Audra knew for certain was this: he was a man who played games, and she was more than ready to engage. The plan was simple, seductive in its execution. Audra knew exactly when Kyle would be vulnerable, knew that he was a man who often sought comfort in the familiar, even as he secretly longed for something more daring. The evening began innocently enough, a casual invitation to discuss business, specifically, their shared interest in the emerging perfume industry. It wasn't just about scents or formulas, though, it was about power, influence, and the war they were both preparing to wage. But as Kyle stood at the door of her apartment, he couldn't have anticipated the scene that awaited him. Audra's voice floated through the crack in the door, cool and inviting, yet unmistakably flirtatious. "The door's open," she called, and the simple phrase was enough to draw him in. As he stepped inside, he found her standing before him in little more than silk lingerie, her body framed by the shimmering fabric that clung to her like a second skin. Her eyes were confident, knowing, as she looked him over with a quiet smile that only added to the allure of the moment. "Do you want to come in?" she asked, her voice a smooth invitation that tugged at something deep within him. Kyle, always the professional, hesitated for only a second, but he couldn't deny the pull. His gaze dropped to the curve of her body, and though his mind screamed for him to remain disciplined, to keep his focus, his body betrayed him. Slowly, he stepped across the threshold, his heart beating a little faster than it had moments before. They sat down to discuss their shared vision, their plans to dominate the perfume industry, to make their mark. But it wasn't just business anymore. The underlying tension between them was undeniable, and it wasn't long before Audra made her move, her words purposeful, calculated. "You seem to like my idea," she purred, leaning forward just enough for him to feel the weight of her words. "That means I'm starting to have influence over you." Kyle shifted in his seat, discomfort mingling with attraction. He had heard her pitch before, but now, with the proximity between them growing, he couldn't help but question his own resolve. "I think we should brainstorm," he suggested, his voice still controlled despite the growing intensity of the situation. "But maybe not here." Audra's smile deepened, her eyes never leaving his. "Wait here," she said softly, standing up. "Let me change before we continue. I don't think this is the best place to discuss our next moves, do you?" The tension between them crackled in the air as she disappeared behind a door, leaving Kyle to sit there in quiet anticipation. His thoughts raced, but a part of him couldn't quite ignore the thrilling uncertainty of the moment. Audra was a woman who could destroy him, or help him rise, depending on how he played the game. And for the first time in a long while, he wasn't sure which side he was on. Meanwhile, Phyllis Summers sat in the corner of the Chancellor Winter's penthouse, her mind whirling with plans of her own. She had been biding her time, waiting for the right moment to strike, knowing full well that the game was never won by patience alone. Now, with her partnership with Cain Ashby solidified, she was finally in position to topple the giants she had long envied. The Abbott family. The Winters family. And of course, Victor Newman. All were about to feel the tremors of her rise to power. Cain, with his calculated ambition, was the perfect ally for this next phase of the plan. He had a ruthless streak that matched her own, and together, they would tear down the walls built by their rivals. I can't wait to see the faces of those who doubted me, Phyllis muttered under her breath, pacing back and forth. When we take Abbott Communications, Jabot, Winters, and Newman Enterprises out from under them, it'll be so sweet. Cain, who had been silently watching her from the doorway, nodded in agreement. His eyes were cold, calculating, the same look he had worn when he had taken control of his own empire. You'll have everything you've ever wanted, Phyllis. And more. You've earned it. She turned to face him, her expression softening for just a moment, but the hardness never left her voice. I just need to make sure we're on the same page. This is more than just business. This is about power. We're going to crush them. Cain gave a curt nod, his gaze unwavering. It's already in motion. They won't even know what hit them. Phyllis smiled. Her plans were finally coming to fruition, and there was no turning back now. She wasn't just going to take control of Genoa City, she was going to own it. As the night wore on, Victor Newman sat in the darkened office at Newman Enterprises, a single light illuminating the room as he scrolled through documents, his mind working over the latest setbacks. The pressure from all sides had never been greater, and the looming threat of Cain and Phyllis only added to the chaos. But for Victor, the most pressing matter was always family. And when it came to his family, there were no compromises. Victor needed to make a move, and he would. His first step, Nikki Newman. They had been through so much together, their bond forged in both love and battle, and now, in this time of crisis, he knew she was the one person who could still bring him clarity. But she was hesitant, uncertain about the role she should play in the fight ahead. Victor needed her by his side, not just for her loyalty, but for the strength of their partnership. Nikki, you can't leave now, he said quietly when they finally sat down together. We have a legacy to protect. Your place is here, with me, with the family. Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the walls that had grown between them over the years seemed to crack. I'm not going anywhere, Victor. But we need to think carefully about how we fight this war. There's more at stake than just business. Victor's eyes darkened with determination. We'll do whatever it takes. As for Adam Newman, his return to Genoa City was less about reuniting with family and more about redemption. He had been absent for too long, caught between his ambition and the need to prove himself. Returning was the only way forward. But what he didn't know was that, like his father, the game had already changed. Cain and Phyllis were already positioning themselves as players, and the question now was whether Adam would align himself with them, or risk going at it alone. As the winds of change howled through Genoa City, alliances were forged, but so were betrayals. In a city where love and loyalty could turn into weapons, no one was safe. And for those who were willing to risk it all, the payoff was greater than they could ever imagine, or more devastating than they could ever anticipate. With every passing day, the battle for control, for power, and for family was being fought on every front. And in the end, only the most cunning would survive the storm. The tension in the room was palpable as Phyllis stood beside Cain, her eyes flashing with determination as she outlined her vision for the future. The stakes were higher than ever, and the game they were playing wasn't just about money. It was about power, control, and proving to Genoa City that Phyllis Summers was not someone to be underestimated. With Cain by her side, the possibilities seemed endless. Together, they could topple the Newman Empire, break down the barriers that had once kept them at arm's length from the city's true elite. Can we keep Victor at Newman? Phyllis asked, her voice a mixture of curiosity and ambition. Cain looked at her, his expression unreadable, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a question, a doubt. Why do you feel sympathy for him? Cain asked, his tone low but piercing. He knew Phyllis too well to believe her motives were purely altruistic. She didn't do anything without calculating the cost. Phyllis smiled, almost humorlessly, and straightened up. No, when we take over Newman, I'll be the one calling the shots. Victor will be beneath me, a mere shadow of what he once was. Her words landed like a heavy weight, each syllable imbued with intent. Cain's gaze hardened for a moment. The power struggle that was about to unfold wasn't just business, it was personal, and he couldn't help but wonder if Phyllis had thought this all through. Was she ready to do what it took to truly conquer, to rule the very empire that Victor Newman had built? That's a privilege I can get behind, Phyllis continued, her eyes locking with his, daring him to challenge her. She could feel the fire in her veins, the thrill of the game. Cain looked at her, his jaw tightening. Don't rush things, he warned. He had always known Phyllis was relentless, but there was a line between confidence and arrogance. He wasn't sure if she had truly considered the consequences of her ambition. Before Phyllis could respond, Amanda Sinclair appeared, her presence cutting through the tension like a blade. She gave Cain a pointed look, as though silently warning him about Phyllis's plans. Her gaze then shifted to Phyllis. You're playing with fire, Phyllis, Amanda said softly, but there was no mistaking the weight of her words. Phyllis shot her a glance, but Amanda's expression remained steady, unflinching. She had seen this before, seen the fallout when ambition went unchecked. Phyllis was clever, but Amanda knew that some battles weren't worth winning. Cain turned toward Phyllis, his voice lowering even further. I need a sign of faith from you, he said, his eyes narrowing. You want Victor's seat, but are you ready to do what it takes to take it? Phyllis didn't hesitate. Say the word, she replied, her voice filled with quiet resolve. She was ready to go to any lengths, even if it meant walking into a storm that could destroy everything. But before Cain could continue, the door opened, and Lily and Damien Cain entered the room, their presence shifting the dynamics yet again. The air felt charged as Cain's attention flickered between the newcomers and the conversation he was having with Phyllis. He offered a casual smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. Beautiful day to be outside, he said, his tone polite but disinterested, as though trying to downplay the tension that had been simmering just moments before. Indeed, Lily agreed, though the sharp edge in her voice betrayed a deeper unease. She had never trusted Phyllis, and seeing her and Cain in the same room only confirmed her suspicions. Lily knew Phyllis well enough to recognize that she was always plotting, always maneuvering. And this time, Lily wasn't sure who Phyllis was working for, or what her true intentions were. As Cain moved to leave, Phyllis exchanged a brief, calculated look with Amanda, who had not made a move to speak since her warning. The tension between them was unmistakable. Lily, however, wasn't finished. She turned toward Phyllis, her words cutting through the silence. I'm glad to see you're enjoying yourself, Phyllis, Lily said, her tone laced with sarcasm. But I can't help but wonder, where were you when my son was grieving? When he was struggling? You just vanished, didn't you? Phyllis's gaze hardened. She wasn't about to let Lily's passive-aggressive remarks go unanswered. Of course I care about my son, Phyllis replied, her voice cool. Who else would, right? Maybe I was dealing with more important matters, things you wouldn't understand. Lily's face twisted with disdain. I know exactly what kind of matters you deal with, Phyllis. Power. Control. Manipulation. But when it comes to your own flesh and blood, I wonder if you've ever considered what really matters to him. You can't just come and go in his life when it's convenient for you. Phyllis's eyes flashed. I have every right to be here, she said firmly. I've earned the right to be in my son's life, more than you'll ever understand. The exchange between the two women simmered, the heat of their words causing a subtle crackling in the room. It was clear they weren't done. This battle of wills was only just beginning. Lily leaned in, her voice low but biting. Maybe you should spend more time with your son and less time plotting. Not everything is a game, Phyllis. Phyllis didn't back down. Perhaps you should stop worrying about me and start worrying about your own life. After all, you seem to be doing quite well with Damien, she said, her tone dripping with mock sweetness. But then again, I suppose that's the kind of thing you enjoy. Winning people over with your charm. Lily narrowed her eyes, her patience running thin. "You have no idea what you're talking about. But let's get something clear, you don't have the power to destroy me, Phyllis." Phyllis's smile widened, knowing that this was just the beginning of what would likely be a long and difficult battle for control over both their families' futures. "We'll see about that," she said, her voice laced with a quiet certainty. As Lily watched her, she couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. Phyllis was a force to be reckoned with, and Lily wasn't sure how much longer she could keep her own world intact while Phyllis lurked in the shadows, always ready to strike. The stakes were higher than ever, and in Genoa City, no one was ever truly safe. Phyllis, Cain, Lily, Amanda, and even Damien, everyone had their own motives, their own reasons for seeking power, control, or love. As the intricate webs of betrayal, loyalty, and ambition continued to unfold, it was clear that no one could predict the final outcome. But one thing was certain, the game was far from over. And as each move was made, the players knew that the consequences of their actions would reverberate far beyond their own lives. In this city, the only thing more dangerous than ambition was the secrets that fueled it, and the ones who were willing to go to any length to keep them hidden. The air in the room was thick with unsaid words and tension, as Amanda tried, once again, to impose a sense of normalcy on the group. Her voice, though calm, betrayed the strain beneath. "We should all try to enjoy today," she said, her words attempting to offer a sliver of hope in a situation that felt increasingly impossible. The quiet, empty gaze she received in return made it clear, nobody was in the mood to be placated. Lily, always quick with a sharp retort, didn't let the moment slip by. "How are we supposed to enjoy today?" she asked, her voice tight with frustration, "when Cain has locked us all in here like rats in a maze?" Her words hit their mark. She wasn't just talking about the physical confinement, it was the emotional straitjacket they had all found themselves in, stuck with Cain Ashby's manipulations, unable to break free. Phyllis, who had been standing near the window, her eyes focused on some distant horizon, flinched at the comment. The weight of Lily's accusation seemed to hang in the air, too heavy for her to ignore. Her face, once hardened by ambition, now flickered with doubt, a brief crack in her usual composure. Without a word, she turned on her heel and walked out of the room, the door swinging shut behind her with a finality that echoed through the silence. Lily and Damien, left alone for a moment, sat at the dining table, trying to regain some semblance of calm. But the quiet wasn't comfortable, not in the presence of the brewing storms both inside and outside the house. The tension between them was palpable, and neither of them knew exactly how to break it. As they quietly ate, the door opened once more, and in walked Audra and Kyle. The air shifted again, this time charged with a different kind of electricity. Audra, ever confident, had a look in her eyes that made Lily uneasy, like a storm cloud gathering in the distance. Kyle, meanwhile, seemed more composed, but Lily could read him too well. His eyes, those same eyes that had once held warmth and affection for her, now carried something colder. She had no illusions about what was happening between him and Audra. Lily, who had been trying to push the thoughts of betrayal away, couldn't help but voice her discomfort. She leaned toward Damien, her voice low enough so that only he could hear, but sharp enough for it to cut through the tension in the air. "I don't know what Audra is doing here," she said, her gaze fixed on the pair across the room. "But I don't like it." Damien, who had been quietly observing the dynamics shift, nodded in agreement. "I don't trust her either," he muttered, his eyes narrowing as he followed Audra's movements. He couldn't quite place it, but something about the way Audra moved, the way she interacted with Kyle, was off. It wasn't just business. There was something else, something more dangerous. Across town, Victor Newman sat in a private compartment on a luxurious train, his fingers absent-mindedly tapping on the armrest. The scenery outside rushed by in a blur, but his mind was elsewhere, focused on far weightier matters. Next to him, Nikki was quiet, her gaze fixed on the passing landscape, but her thoughts mirrored his. They both understood the gravity of the situation that was unfolding. Adam, their estranged son, had returned to town, and the news had rippled through their family like a shockwave. "I want to go home," Nikki said softly, her voice tinged with concern. She had never been one to back away from conflict, but this situation was different. Victoria and Claire, her daughters, needed her. And with the revelation about Adam, the Newman companies were in jeopardy. "Victoria and Claire need us. And with Adam's return, our companies do too." Victor turned his head to look at her, his expression stern but softening just slightly. "There's no better way to defeat our enemies than on their own turf," he said, his voice full of resolve. "We'll strike while they think they have the upper hand." Nikki raised an eyebrow, unsure of what Victor was implying. "And what about the fact that Cain believes someone will try to kill him?" she asked, her voice a little sharper. It seemed impossible that Victor had overlooked such an important detail. Victor didn't flinch. "Let Cain believe whatever he wants. He's not our concern. We've got bigger problems with the others in play." Nikki sighed, but before she could respond, Nick joined them in the compartment. His presence was like a breath of fresh air, yet the heaviness of the situation lingered. He looked between his parents, the weight of the conversation sinking in. "We need to make sure that we have people in Genoa City watching everything. If we want to move fast, we'll need eyes and ears," he said. His voice was calm, but there was an urgency in it, a sense that time was running out.